Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're all doing well here. I just wanted to hop on here and talk about kind of an issue that I've seen kind of arising the past handful of years in gaming here, and it's gaming and games seemingly getting too long. And what I mean by that is a lot of these games in kind of the recent handful of years here, a lot of them make these games that are super long or like stuffed to the fucking brim, full of content and missions and stuff to do and explore just seemingly for the sake of milking as many hours out of you as possible, or for the sake of like doing it because they can. Like, Starfield comes to mind of like, oh, look how many fucking planets we can put into our game for you to explore. Like, 90% of them do nothing, and you'll wish you never actually visited those planets, but we can do it. That's cool, I guess. Or just like something like an Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which is a game that really kind of kickstarted this idea in my head, however many years ago, of like seemingly just stuffing, a game full of content just to have, just to do it. It doesn't further your game experience. It doesn't advance the story in any meaningful way. It essentially just sets up like barriers to the story and the game that I actually want to play. And it's like, oh, well, I really want to advance the story because it's cool. I like the setting and everything, but oh, well, that's a level 13 zone and I'm only like a level 11. So I've got to do a bunch of meaningless stuff or uninteresting stuff to get there, and then I can actually have fun again. And I'm a fan of some long form games. Like I love Skyrim, I love The Witcher. Red Dead is an amazing series as a whole. I used to, play World of Warcraft, but one of the reasons I kind of stopped playing is because of the point I'm about to make here. And some of these games, like World of Warcraft or Assassin's Creed Odyssey and stuff, not only are these things time consuming and kind of grindy in the way that they add content in here as barriers, but it makes the experience of the game feel more like a means to an end when you're completing these like filler quests and everything than it is like advancing the story. The Witcher 3 and Skyrim have a lot of quests, a lot of things for you to do, and not all of them are perfect or amazing, I'll grant you. But you never feel like you're doing this just to, get to the part of the game you want to be in or advance the story because you have to do this to get to the next part. Whereas in Assassin's Creed Odyssey, literally a lot of the missions or fighting you get into is literally just to level up to get to the zone I want to be in. And it's the exact same thing in like a game like World of Warcraft, where the 0 through 60 experience, or it is different now, obviously, with the expansions, is just leveling for most people, is just leveling to get to the end game content. And it's, a game, it has to have a middle, it has to have some of these filler things if it's going to be long like this. But you can make it in a way where like you want to play these missions because you want to see what happens next. You can string along the story in a way where it doesn't feel meaningless, even if it might actually be. The Witcher and Skyrim are good examples of this, where these quests, even the insignificant ones, seem interesting and unique to the point where I don't mind actually doing them. And in some of these other games, it's really just it's a problem. Another game that comes to mind is like Outer Worlds. I can't remember the average play time, the completion on that, but that game just felt like one giant fetch quest essentially that had almost no meaning behind it. The story was lackluster, which is the touch of death, obviously, for any RPG game, given the fact that it's the entire point of playing a game like that. And these fetch quests had no meaning behind them. They were just a means to the end and a barrier to get by to get to the end game content that you wanted. And that's kind of the theme of why I think these games are too long. They're putting in content and barriers that don't need to be there, and they're extending the game more than it needs to be. A game for me personally, especially at this stage in my life where I'm busier with school and work and everything, has to really blow my fucking socks off if it wants me to stay around for, dozens and dozens or hundreds of hours. And it's, most games just don't do that. And another thing is, it seems like people are almost, when I'm talking about as game developers, almost seem to have this, notion almost that short video games like can't be good or can't be like huge AAA titles like big successes or anything. The game I'm playing in the background here is a testimony to the contrary, obviously. Warhammer 40K Space Marine 2 is a particularly long game. You can keep playing it for a while because of the multiplayer mode and everything, but it's not a particularly long game, but it tells a fantastic story. It's action packed. You never feel bored during the 10 to 20 hours that you're playing this or whatever. It's a terrific game, and other games like it, like the Portal series comes to mind, the Firewatch series, if you know ball, know that game. Games that are fucking legendary. Terrific, examples of some of the best video games of all time. Games that can also be completed in like a day. It doesn't matter how long you make the game, which I think these guys have kind of lost sight of. It's more of a matter of how well you put together a story in a game here. And I think another point is just because you can put a lot of hours into a game doesn't mean it's necessarily, you know, packed to the brim or has this problem. Games like shooters, like Call of Duty, or strategy games, or multiplayer games, where you're doing missions and missions and you can replace and replay them and stuff, like a COD, for example, they don't have long play times because each multiplayer match you get into is essentially its own confined game, and you can start and quit whenever you want. There's no end goal or end time there. So those games don't really count. You just have to have a kind of an addictive kind of gameplay loop essentially for those. But I'm talking about games with a linear progression and like a clear ending of a main storyline or something like that, where a lot of these games are just making the middle of that just feel like hell. It's almost like chores. And I'll admit some of this is probably just like my age. I feel like as you get older, you have less free time, obviously, unless you're lucky enough to like, play games professionally, and that definitely bites into it. But at the same time, it's really just you don't need games to be this long and as grindy as they are. Some people like the grindy games, and that's to each their own, obviously. But I've never been, a fan of someone who likes the grind just for the grind. Like games like fucking Rust. Jesus, that is, one of the least favorite games I've ever played in my life. The grind you have to do to play that a competitive nature, and people setting up fucking alarm clocks linked to their bases getting raided, waking up in the middle of the goddamn night to defend their fucking Rust base. Like, first of all, how do you not look yourself in the mirror waking up at like 4 in the morning after your base getting raided and think like, what the fuck am I doing? But second of all, like games like that or like fucking Tarkov or like Destiny, where you're just grinding, almost a grind in some of these games. I've never understood it. I think short games are almost preferable. Like if you can get a game a good 10 to 30 hours, this tells an amazing story, keeps me entertained the whole time, keep me engaged the whole time. That is the sweet spot. I don't need these 100+ hour games. I don't need these 200+ hour games where you just fucking, jerk me around the entire time essentially just because you can or you want to. It's kind of annoying, honestly. And it's the reason why I don't end up finishing a lot of games these days because they just kind of lose me, honestly. And it's, kind of just boring after a certain point there. And it's kind of a problem. Another point I think you can make is just like look at the IMBD like top 100 games and like scan through some of the games there. How many of them are over 100+ hours that aren't like games you can continuously replay like shooter games and stuff of that nature? Of course, not a lot. Like you have Skyrim barely over if you count the main extras. The main storyline itself isn't particularly long, but Skyrim and stuff like that. There are some banger games, and it can be done well, but you have to essentially lead the game on in a way that is entertaining to follow. There's a difference between having a game that strings you along and has these barriers that seem like chores, and a game that strings you along and I want to play because I want to see what happens in the story, like The Witcher. Like I didn't want to put that game down because it was a story unfolding, even in the minuscule side quest that I wanted to completely follow. Nothing felt insignificant. Nothing felt like a means to an end or a barrier I had to get over to get to something I actually wanted to do. And that's what people are losing sight of, I feel like, in these game companies making these huge ass games, like, Outer Worlds, like Starfield. These games just like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. These games that are just packed full to the brim, full of content for content's sake. And I think that's the real issue with the gaming industry, or it's becoming an issue more and more I see, and it's something I'm hoping kind of reverts with games like Space Marine 2 or Firewatch, which it was a little older release, but still like just games. I just want to see more games showing that these short, hot burns, these short and fast and hot burns is really the preferred method and how you really should do it because it's a better way to experience a game, and you don't need to, pack your game full of content for content's sake, like Assassin's Creed Odyssey. If you're gonna pack your game full of content, do it like Skyrim, where it's not a necessity to do it. You can go about it however you want. Like make it a sandbox. That's the only time where a game packed full of content actually works is when it's sandboxy. A game like Minecraft, a game like Skyrim, where you can really do whatever you want whenever you want it and kind of don't have to worry about the order necessarily. That's the only time a content-filled game and a really long game works because it doesn't feel like a chore. It doesn't feel like a linear progression set out of walls. It feels like a little, an active and alive world that I can interact with and kind of come and go as I please. And that's kind of the main, focus point of how to do that right. Which Assassin's Creed Odyssey, again, I keep harping on them because they do this shit and it's just like, okay, it's full of content, but the content is there just to level you up so you can get to a different zone. It's just fights. It's meaninglessly boss fight. It's like World of Warcraft, the fucking South Park episode where they're farming boars. It's essentially like, is there any fun to this? Is there any meaning to this? Not at all. It's just an end. It's a means to an end. But yeah, anyways, that's just kind of my thoughts on, games being too long these days and why I think, it's not always a good thing and why I think they should kind of like revert revert from this idea that more is always better just for, the sake of being more. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below what you think of that, your own thoughts on that, if, you agree with my opinion or anything. And yeah, love to hear from you guys. And if you guys found this entertaining or informing, I'd really appreciate a subscribe or a like. It really helps out the channel and the video. And as always, your view is appreciated. So yeah, until next time, peace.